I quit smoking for almost 6 years because of Elton John. I was walking down the hallway and Elton John was dressed in complete fringe, glittery cowboy outfit. He was riding a fake unicorn and he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "Are you a smoker?" And I said, "Yes." And he goes, "You smell like shit."
Oh.
And then he kept walking.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hello, Cleveland! Turn your speakers up to 11 because it's time for Too Much Effing Perspective, the podcast that asks musicians and entertainers to relive their most Spinal Tap moments when nothing goes right and everything gets kind of weird. I'm your host, Alan Keller, a comedy writer in LA and former lead singer of the least heralded Chicago band, The Falling Willendas.
And I'm your co-host, Alex Hoffman, former tour manager for Radiohead and former lead singer of the least heralded Milwaukee band, The Vainglorious.
Our guest today was a cast member and writer on Saturday Night Live for 9 seasons, Bobby Moynihan.
Bobby tells us about having a piece of pizza with Paul McCartney, what a thrill it was to sit in Chris Farley's chair for SNL read-throughs, and where Ted Lasso's Jason Sudeikis would stick his finger right before they'd go live before 1 million people.
So without further ado, let's go to the TMEP show.
It really puts perspective on things, though, doesn't it?
Not too much. There's too much
Yeah,
effing perspective now.
Alex, let me just start this off by saying how impressed I am that you, with full-blown COVID, are doing this recording today.
Full blown. The show must go on.
And your voice is even more dulcet than normal. So I think actually the show might benefit from your certainly contagious, possibly fatal illness. Anyway, I just want to say one of the reasons I love This Is Spinal Tap is that it combines two of my favorite things: satire and 70s rock.
Me too.
And as you know, I consider myself kind of a scholar of comedy. I read books about it. I study famous bits. I even collect autographs. Like I have John Cleese's from Monty Python and Groucho Marx, Bob Hope, Lenny Bruce. I have a ton of them.
Alan, you are a veritable encyclopedia of comedy, and that's why I hired you for this podcast.
Yeah, I'm a veritable Joke and Wagnalls. Oh, God, it's horrible. How about Witanica?
Going over everybody's head, as usual.
These are awful, and they're puns, and they will prove to the audience that I don't belong anywhere near comedy other than reading about it. But anyway, my love of and respect for good comedy actually kept me from really trying to write my own material for years. I just never thought I could measure up. But in 2000, I decided to give it a go. And I pivoted from music to comedy. I began taking sketch writing courses at Chicago's Second City Theater, and it changed my life. I wrote some stuff that got people's attention. It gave me confidence. Then I wrote a screenplay that got me representation. And the next thing you know, I'm hauling my entire family to Los Angeles to do it full time. But I think the main reason why I actually wrote anything worthwhile was because of Second City itself. I mean, I was inspired. I was writing in the same rooms where Bill Murray once was, and John Belushi, Harold Ramis, Dan Aykroyd, Alan Arkin, Fred Willard. I mean, all these greats. And I couldn't really help but up my game. I mean, I don't know if I would have ever written anything that I would have shown anyone else if I'd stayed at home and written in a vacuum. Second City meant that much to me.
Yeah, that's really cool. And of course, our fellow Wisconsin cheesehead Chris Farley was there too. And so I want to call him out. But, you know, I think our guest today, Bobby Moynihan, felt the same way about being hired as a cast member on SNL. And that's where a lot of your fellow Second City alums ended up performing.
Yeah, and what I really loved about Bobby is that he isn't jaded after all his success. He's still in awe of all the legends who went through Saturday Night Live through the years.
Yeah, it's really cool. So without further ado, as you like to say, let's go to our conversation with Bobby. But first, a short break.
And now a guy who got to say live from New York, it's Saturday night, 19 times, Bobby Moynihan. Bobby, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
No sweat.
Yeah, it's fun. And it's impressive to see your setup. We've had a lot of wonderful guests, and you get someone on like Stuart Copeland, who's actually got a full recording studio. And he's kind of fumbling around with things and trying to get it going. So
This was the pandemic. I'm on like 30 cartoons,
Right.
and they sent over a rig for one of them. And I said, how much money can I give you to just leave it? And I begged them to, and I have no idea how to use it. If it ever breaks, I'm screwed.
that's really smart. Well, good. Yeah, you're future-proofed until you're not, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
So I wanted to ask you to kick things off. You're in one of my favorite SNL sketches of all time, which is Scared Straight,
Oh,
with
yeah.
Kenan Thompson and Jason Sudeikis and Bill Hader and Andy Samberg. And just for our listeners who haven't seen it, the setting is based on this classic 1970s documentary about these juvenile delinquents who were brought into a maximum security prison, and the convicts were supposed to scare the shit out of them, basically, right? The guests who joined you guys in that were Taylor Swift, Betty White, Lindsay Lohan, three amazing women who are iconic for different reasons. And I think there's got to be a Spinal Tap moment story coming out of that sketch. Anything come to mind?
Those were the sketches where we knew that Kenan had 90% of the work, and then the last 10% was like, we're unspokenly allowed to mess around, or we know that Jason is going to do something. We don't know what, but we know the last minute of the sketches, people are expecting us to do something stupid to each other. Those sketches always felt a little looser for some reason, but like they existed before I was on the show. I think they did a couple of them where my part was the host's part. It was like Shia LaBeouf. And then I think when I got there, the hosts started coming in with Kenan being like those characters. But like, I definitely remember the one where Jason used to like jump up and sit on the desk,
Right.
but I don't think he was expecting the whole pencil holder to go flying off the desk or something, like, so he just started laughing and then we all lost it. Like, but I mean, that was every day there. I mean, like the way the monologue went, you're standing on stage completely visible to the live studio audience, but not the people at home. So you're right off camera, but the entire audience can see you. So you'd be standing there absolutely terrified, waiting to go on live television, and you'd have 2 seconds and Jason would just stick his finger as far up your butt as he could. And he did it multiple times, and it was genuinely terrifying. If you see me enter a monologue going, whoa, hey, hi, that's why. That's why.
It's so funny that you're bringing this up because, you know, we had Fred Armisen on the show.
The best.
And I said to Fred, you're on a live network TV show with used to be 10 million people watching, and you must have tons and tons of Spinal Tap moments. Things must have always gone wrong on the fly. And he couldn't think of any. He kind of acted like they never happened.
I've only, thankfully, in 9 years, only had one or two things go like wrong.
Huh.
That's very lucky on that show. And I also think it's a testament to that show that in 9 years, there was only two, and they weren't even that bad. It was just like, because you're on live television, you're freaking out. But like, I think Fred's right. There wasn't a lot of missteps at SNL, to be honest. It may be like an insane place to work, but the people who work there don't fuck up.
That's amazing.
That's incredible.
It's truly insane.
You got to tell us those two stories because that's what this show's about.
Oh, no, I'm good. Thank you, though. I'll see you guys later. No, I'm just I mean, first of all, just to go back to Fred was the king of the same thing. You know, they'd go 5 seconds till you're on live television, and Fred would just go, I can't see anything. And everyone would panic, but he was completely kidding. Like, he was just being, or there would be like 5 seconds to good nights, and he would be at, there's 2 steps to get up on the stage, and he would be acting like he was a 99-year-old man, like he couldn't get up the 2 steps, and making everybody panic for that. That Fred just constant bits.
Well, that's Fred's life, because I have a friend, Eddie Jemison, who before Fred was famous, when he was a drummer in Chicago, in the same scene I was in, he worked at a coffee shop with him. And he said Fred would all of a sudden go, that guy didn't pay. And he'd run out after nobody and disappear. And he'd do it all the time. So I guess that was always his MO.
That's a good Fred bit. I've seen Fred on Zoom, and his favorite, he just freezes. And he just pretends he's frozen, but he blinks, and it's ridiculous.
That's an old bit from, what was the show the Zucker brothers did? Police Squad. Remember they always,
hell yeah.
they'd freeze the end of the show.
The freeze
and then all of a
frame
sudden,
at the end of the show.
Yeah. Oh, God, that was such a good show.
Well, Bobby, David Cross messed with us by telling us he'd never seen This Is Spinal Tap. And in fact, he even kind of goes, yeah, what's that movie about? Like a band or, and we...
I've always been meaning to see it.
And we've been on that really hard. It was very, very embarrassing.
Humiliating, yes.
That sounds about right. Nothing like ever super terrifying happened at SNL, but one was, I have a very distinct memory early on of just standing there. It was like season finale. I was a little wistful. I was a little like, this might be my last show. This is an amazing place. I was just kind of taking it all in and having a very SNL moment. And someone just ran up to me, flung me around, and handed me a suit and just went, put this on. You're playing Jason's character in the next sketch. And I was just like, what? And Jason's 6'7", I'm like 350. It hardly fit. The sleeves were like down to here. And the next thing you know, you're on live television reading lines you've never read before.
Unbelievable.
That I'll always remember. I don't even remember what it was or like what happened. I just remembered something like Jason was like in devil makeup or something and he couldn't get out of it in time. So they were just like, you're in this next sketch.
That's amazing.
Wow.
And I was just like, what?
That's pressure.
That was terrifying. There was a cold open. It was my first cold open where I got to say live from New York by myself. And I remember being genuinely excited for that moment. And the show started and the cue cards came up and it said, thank you. It's great to be here hosting Saturday Night Live. My cue cards were for the monologue, not for the sketch that I was in.
Oh, God.
And I had like the first line of the cold open, and it was only me and Kristen Wiig. So the whole time I'm just looking over my shoulder for cue cards that are behind me. That Kristen, it was that was a nightmare. That was a genuine nightmare. Yeah, there's been a bunch, but I was dressed as, you can see it online. Gerard Butler was hosting. It was a Beauty and the Beast sketch. Kristen is Belle. Gerard Butler is the Beast. I think Bill is Lumiere, and I'm Cogsworth, the clock. And I was just ill. I was just like super, super sick. And they were just like, we don't care. You have to go on live television. And I was in that clock costume just throwing up backstage and then like right on camera. That one was rough. Also that night, Don Pardo fell asleep in the booth. Like I had to go do a voiceover in the booth. And I went to go open the door and I couldn't open it because Don Pardo was just passed out in the booth. And I literally physically, we like couldn't get in the room because his legs were in the way. That was terrifying too.
Pardo, yeah, narcoleptic.
Yeah.
I heard you share a story about your last night as a cast member where you actually were throwing up because you were so excited.
Violently ill for my last show. Looking back, I think I was just so emotionally overwhelmed. My body just shut down. From 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was just in my bathroom, in my dressing room, on the ground. Yeah, but it was fun.
A lot of the most famous Spinal Tap moments that we know from SNL were bands going off script. You know, the Replacements famously swore and also got Harry Dean Stanton drunk, who was, I think, sober at the time. John Belushi got the punk band Fear on. And my favorite is Elvis Costello, you know, changing up his thing. Any Spinal Tap moments from the bands that played during your tenure? And also, who were your favorite bands that you got to meet?
Wow, that's a good one. I was not there for Ashley Simpson, but I was an SNL nerd and still am. So I did a lot of like to crew guys. If we had 10 minutes, I'm like, were you here for Ashley Simpson or were you here for Sinead O'Connor?
Right.
Were you here for all the hits kind of thing? And asked them what it was like. They have amazing stories about what it was like in the studio for that moment. And There's an amazing one where Ian McKellen is just hammered for Kylie Minogue and he wouldn't leave and he just sat on the edge of the stage. And there's that one's pretty amazing. My favorite musical introduction ever is Patrick Stewart saying, I watched it 100,000 times. I had the clip on my computer on my home screen and I would just click it every day and watch it 3 times. And it's just Patrick Stewart going, ladies and gentlemen, salt and pepper. And it's my favorite musical introduction ever. It was truly astonishing. I don't think I had any like crazy thing. Oh, I mean, going on stage with Paul McCartney and Bruce Springsteen to sing Santa Claus is Coming to Town was pretty nuts. That was a last minute thing. They were just like, get up on stage with us. That's SNL, where you go like 1 minute you're tired and complaining to your friend, and the next minute you're doing something that you're going to be talking about for the rest of your life. It's nuts. That place is bonkers.
Alan is the consummate Beatles fan. And normally when he brings the Beatles up, I try to shut it down as quickly as possible. But in this case, I'm going to ask you to share your story about having pizza with Paul McCartney.
Yeah, it's just not like that. Like, it's just like, it was a very insignificant thing. He was around. He was around enough that like we'd be walking down the hall and I would hear, hello, Bobby. And just go like, are you kidding me? Hi, Paul. How are you, Paul? And he would be like, great. Do you want some pizza? And I'd go, I think I do.
That's
and
cool.
Have a slice of pizza with Paul McCartney and Jenna, the stage manager, and just talk about New York pizza. Anything but the Beatles he wants to talk about. And that was all the time. Or 2:00 in the morning and you round a corner and Bill Murray has Leslie Jones up against a wall and he's going, you're a Ghostbuster now. And I'm like, oh my God, what is happening? It's a lot of that.
Well, going back to McCartney, since Alex opened up the Pandora's box there, some of my bandmates played with Brian Wilson for a long time after we broke up. And my collaborator in my band was on first name basis with McCartney. And he said, you just can't believe it. He's absolutely the most normal, natural guy. And he has 5 minutes for everybody. And another friend of mine, I don't know if you know the actor Gary Anthony Williams.
Sure. It was amazing.
Gary told me this story where and it's on our quick taps, if anyone wants to listen to them, our short episodes for short attention spans. But Gary told me that he was asked with Cedric Yarborough to be at a table read. And he had to sign an NDA. It was a big deal. And he didn't know what it was about. And he gets there and he goes, I'm in this room. And it's all A-list people. Like Meryl Streep is on conference call and everyone's there. And we're waiting for the person running it. And they're late. And all of a sudden they come. It's 10 minutes late. And it's McCartney. And Gary goes, excuse me, sir, what do you do that you're late today? And McCartney, instead of being pissed off or anything, goes, well, I'm a dancer. Gary goes, I'm black. I don't care about the Beatles. They're a white person's band to me. But after 5 minutes with that man, I understood all of Beatlemania because he is so funny, so sharp, so natural, puts everyone at ease. And I'm like, wow, if anyone has an ego, all they have to do is say, this is what McCartney is like, and you have no business having an ego.
I have a distinct memory of him. I don't remember what it was for. I think he played a waiter in a sketch or something. Like he was in a sketch where he had a tray of drinks. And before the sketch started, he was just going like, this is during the live show. I mean, he's been on the show, gotta be 20 times, whatever. And he was just walking around to the crew with the tray, pretending to be a waiter, just like in between the sketch. He's just messing around. He's just a dude, But like, that's what it was like with Lorne. Like, you're like, oh my God, I'm talking to Lorne Michaels. And then you realize he's just a very, very rich Canadian comedy nerd who has this show. They're all people.
Well, let's connect that. Lorne famously back in the first season was offering the Beatles, like, what was it, $400?
Oh my gosh. $4,000 or no, $3,000 you can give Ringo less.
And McCartney and John Lennon were together one night on a Saturday and they almost did it.
They showed up, but they didn't make it in time.
Unreal.
Oh, is that what happened?
Supposedly they went down and it was already over.
Lorne is obviously such an epic character in the history of comedy. Can you tell us about the fart face comment that he made?
Yeah, guys, you guys did your research. It's so funny too. Like I've been thinking about this all day, and not one of my stories was about SNL. It was all about touring with the UCB touring company.
Oh.
We had like millions of nightmare stories, but it's so funny. It never dawned on me that I would be talking about SNL at all today. It's funny. There was a sketch that Will Forte wrote called Fart Face, and it got about the same reaction in the room as it did just now, which was just complete silence at the thing. But it gave me one of my favorite moments at Saturday Night Live, which was like, it was a in between dress and air. Sometimes can be tense. Sometimes it's, looser, but like this was a particularly tense one. And it was really, really quiet for like 30 seconds. And then out of nowhere, just Lauren's little voice just went, "We have a boom shadow on Fart Face." And to this day, when I'm sad, I think about it and I know everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, that's a nice thing to have in the brain box. He also did a funny thing, your baby gift, right?
I don't think he meant to. I will
don't think he
never
meant to do
know
that?
the answer. No, I don't. When my daughter was born, he called me and he was absolutely wonderful. I don't know if he timed it, but the second he hung up the phone, there was a knock on my door and there was a woman with a giant bouquet of flowers and a gift. And I opened it up and it was a glass bowl with my daughter's real birthday on it and the name Penelope. And that's not my daughter's name.
Your chair or your seat in the SNL table read room had been Chris Farley's chair. Is that right?
Yeah, I moved around a couple times, but man, like sat in the same space as Farley for years. Or Phil Hartman's old seat too.
The butt space of legends.
Yeah. Finally.
Al and I are both Wisconsinites. We both went to University of Wisconsin-Madison. So when I was there, Farley had already graduated from Marquette and had come back to Madison and was working at his dad's company that sold road tar oil. So Chris was in an improv troupe with my roommate and Brian Stack, who you may know from
Wow, of course.
Conan O'Brien,
legend,
was in the troupe too. It was called the Arc Theater. It was literally like a block from our house. So they would come over to our house and hang out and they would rehearse in our living room and all this kind of stuff.
That's like the Beatles for me. I'm like, what?
So there's a story that I've told in the past. You may appreciate it, Bobby. I thought it was funny for a long time and I've kind of reconsidered it a little bit, but I will tell you. So we were Wisconsin kids in the 80s, right? So big keg parties were a huge thing on campus. The drinking age was like 19 or whatever. And Chris would come to our parties. The way he drank beer was he would fill up a cup, turn it pretty much upside down. Some would go down his throat and some would go down the front of his t-shirt. So within a half an hour, his t-shirt was soaking wet, stuck to his belly. And I think you said something about being 350. I think that's about what Chris was, And so he'd walk around, sort of slapping his belly and all this kind of stuff. He spent some nights on the couch at our house after these parties. It turned out one of my other roommates, the guy who was not in the troupe, they kind of looked at each other and they said, "Hey, wait, weren't you at so-and-so's wedding?" "Oh, yeah, I was there." It turned out they were cousins. So anyway, we had one of these late night keggers. The place was trash as always was. We were up at noon mopping the floor. Chris had been there. He came back because he'd left 2 joints at our house. And as we were mopping, very hungover, he starts talking to us and he lights one joint. Then he lights the other with one in each hand and he just starts smoking them. And he says, "Oh, you guys want any?" "No, thanks. We were hurting." So he just kind of smokes them. He's just chatting, normal conversation, finishes them up. And then he says, "All right, guys, I got to go. I got to pick up my dad at the airport."
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. I've told that story before and I've gotten big laughs. It's like, "Oh yeah, that's Farley," With more maturity, I've kind of thought back. I'm like, maybe that's not a great story to tell.
It's what killed him.
Yeah.
Right.
I will tell you a story another one that I enjoyed. So we were down at the student union and we were walking to the parking lot at night and 2 young girls were in their car and Chris climbed up on the hood and started to do kind of a humping motion. And, because of his girth, the front bumper was practically going down to the pavement. They're honking their horn, turning on their windshield wipers, trying to get him to back off. But he just wouldn't miss an opportunity for some great spontaneity that broke us up in a big way.
That's what made him who he was that need to do whatever was necessary
Yeah.
to make you laugh and forget all of your problems.
You've done a tremendous amount of impersonations, Danny DeVito, Cliff Christie, Brian Kilmeade. And there's a famous story of Dustin Hoffman did Norman Mailer on Saturday Night Live. And Norman Mailer caught him at a cocktail party and almost punched him out.
Yeah.
Does that ever happen to you, meeting the people that you've impersonated and they've confronted you or any other?
I've never been punched in the face, but I played Nathan Lane and I heard through the grapevine that he was not happy about it, but I was a huge fan of his. I did him for my audition. I don't think I portrayed him in bad light in any way. The worst one was I played Rosie O'Donnell and then did a game show with Rosie O'Donnell, and she was so kind and so wonderful. I was Wendy the Snapple lady, and then they made me you, and I didn't want to do it. Like, I'm sorry. I love you. You're so kind. But she was super, super cool about it. But if there's one I wish I could take back, it would be that one, just because it was unnecessary, and it was just me going like, God, I got to get on TV this week. Rather than thinking.
Sure.
I played Snooki, and then I did the New Year's Eve MTV special with Snooki, and we filmed it at 9 a.m, and she was just like, let's do shots. And it was like, okay. And it was 9 o'clock in the morning getting hammered with Snooki. That was a good one. I played Carrie Fisher and then met Carrie Fisher a week later, and she had seen it, and that was amazing. She was absolutely wonderful.
And you're a Star Wars fan, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That must have been amazing.
Yeah, it was nuts.
I love her. Didn't you write a sketch that Elton John didn't appreciate?
Yeah. I had gotten it on a couple times. There was a viral video of a little kid. I think the plot of it was someone was telling him that he could curse, and he was didn't want to curse, and he just kept going it's okay. He just kept asking if it was okay or something like that. I don't even remember what it was, but I just thought it would be funny to play a little kid. I think the first one was Bradley Cooper. I met my mom was the coach of a hockey team or something, and I got to meet all the players, and he was the star player, and I couldn't care less about him. I was psyched to meet the guy who cleaned all the pads, and the whole joke was just whoever the star of the thing was, I was psyched to meet them. I was on the set of Meet the Parents or Meet the Fockers, and couldn't care less about Robert De Niro, but was very psyched to meet the craft service guy who was Keenan. The bit was anytime the famous person came up, I went, hey, and didn't care less. And we did one with Elton John. I think it was the third time it was going to happen. And he was just like, what the fuck is this? No one doesn't know who I am. And I was just like, oh, I'm so sorry. He hated me. And
oh, God.
I also quit smoking for almost 6 years because of Elton John, because I was walking down the hallway and Elton John was dressed in complete fringe, glittery cowboy outfit. He was riding a fake unicorn, and he stopped and he looked at me and he said, are you a smoker? And I said, yes. And he goes, you smell like shit. And then he kept walking.
Oh my goodness.
And I quit smoking immediately for almost 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Elton John.
Yeah.
Does that imply that you've restarted?
I did at SNL. I have since quit. I haven't had one in probably, I don't even know, maybe 10 years now.
Is that coincide with you getting off the show? Because I got to think that you really need to smoke or more things.
Yeah, that was terrible. It was 2 packs a night on writing night.
Wow.
Those writing nights were rough. They weren't. We just romanticized it. We were like, oh, we got to smoke cigarettes all night. It probably wasn't even that hard.
A couple more SNL questions. Lauren said, you identify with the cast that was present in your high school days, right? And you were in there long enough so that you're basically in several generations of the show.
Amy and Daryl were still there when I started, and the people backstage, like Marcy Klein and Mike Shoemaker and all those guys, like the original crew was still there for a little bit. And then I was there for kind of that Kristen, Jason, Bill, Andy, Fred renaissance. And then my class feels a little bit more like me, Taryn, Vanessa, Jay, Paul Britton, Nassim, that crew, and then kind of was there to see the new people start to come in, like Alex Moffat and those guys, Mikey. And yeah, I was there 9 years, a long time.
To me, if I were to put together my favorite ever, it would probably be, and you're right up there, but Will Ferrell and Kristen Wiig.
Oh, I mean, yeah, put on this earth for that show. Maya Rudolph, Fred Armisen, I would put in that same category.
Well, The Californians is my favorite sketch, I think.
Oh,
ever.
Yeah. 2 years of Fred doing that bit in the writer's room of just every week. Like, did you go to L.A.? Yeah, I just got back. I was there. What I did was I took Tahunga down, and he would just start giving us directions. And we were like, no one asked for directions, Fred.
I love that you said Tahunga because I lived right off of Tahunga when I moved here. Okay, one more thing. You're in one of my favorite bits too, Birthday Clown with Louis C.K.
Yeah, the whole joke is just a birthday clown shows up for a birthday party for little Ernie, and then he's like, no, I'm Ernie. I'm Ernest. Nice to meet you. It's my birthday, and it's just him alone, and he's drinking beers and taking a piss while he's watching. It's just like what would happen. And then in the very end, he's just like, I'm going to kill you now.
Well, yes, that kind of reminds me of a Spinal Tap moment in my own life. Back in the mid-'80s, I worked at the Chicago Reader, and I was a typist, and we'd open the mail, and occasionally we would get subscription requests, and some would be from Joliet State Prison. And so I remember I got a letter from Joliet State Prison and opened it up. I'd like a subscription to the Chicago Reader, signed John Wayne Gacy.
What?
And I dropped it immediately. No one would pick it up. And I basically took 2 pencils and chopsticked it up.
Do you still have the letter?
No. It really freaked me out.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to touch it either, to be honest.
Isn't that crazy?
Jesus Christmas.
I do want to segue to your actual being on tour, Upright Citizens Brigade. You were on tour as a member of that crew. Tell us about being on the road with them and some of the Spinal Tap moments.
Well, yeah, it was just pre-SNL, like coming up through comedy. Like I was doing Upright Citizens Brigade, the touring company, and that was like every single trip was a nightmare. We had no clue what we were doing. Like there were so many insane things. I mean, me, Ben Schwartz, Adam Pally, Gil Ozeri, Eugene Cordero, and Charlie Sanders were all in a van that we rented to drive up to Canada for the Just for Laughs festival. And idiots, like complete idiots. We were children. We had no idea what was happening. We just wanted to be comedians. And we drove through customs with a bag full of fake guns for our sketch show. Without even a thought. They were like, do you have any guns in the car? And we all looked at each other like, oh, yeah, a bunch. Like a whole bunch. We got a whole bag of them. They're all fake. And they were like, get the fuck out of the car. Get the fuck out of the car. Like being pulled over because they thought we were about to go on a killing spree. But it was like, no, there's also a bag of mustaches right next to it if you open it. Like it was very, there was a lot of like that where I went like, oh my gosh, we almost got shot in the face for comedy.
I had a similar experience. I was doing Second City. I had a sketch show right after 9/11, and I wrote a sketch that was basically Leave It to Beaver, but Beaver was a Palestinian suicide bomber. And I had actually made a bomb vest for the sketch. And again, this is maybe January 2022. And we were rehearsing and I had this bomb.
No, 2002.
Oh, 2002. Excuse me.
I was going to say
20 years here.
I've heard this story 10 times.
And anyways, there was a bomb vest on my passenger seat and I was getting a Second City. I was late and I did an illegal U-turn and I got pulled over. And at the last second, I look and I'm like, holy shit. If they see this bomb vest, They're going to close down the loop. And so I threw my jacket on it at the last second, fortunately, because I'd be in Guantanamo Bay probably today. Hey, listeners, at this point in our chat, Bobby's computer went all David S. Pumpkins on him, so we had to reconvene another day. So here is part 2 of our chat with Bobby Moynihan.
Yeah, Bobby, I wanted to ask you about on Saturday Night Live, the David S. Pumpkins sketch, and you performed that with Mikey Day and Tom Hanks. Is that correct?
Yep.
And so that's become one of the iconic sketches of all times. I mean, when we talked earlier, I brought up Chris Farley, and I think the Farley, Patrick Swayze, Chippendales dancing sketch is another one that's right up there in people's top 5, top 10. And David S. Pumpkins, I think, is right there too. Can you share with us, were there any Spinal Tap moments in putting that together, whether in the writing, in the actual performing, or the aftermath?
Yeah, it was a very silly thing. I mean, it literally started at 3 a.m. saying, what can we get on that'll air every Halloween? So I think that's where it started. And we were watching some dumb video of a guy dancing, and we just started doing these weird dances. And then all of a sudden it was all nonsense, and it still is. And like, that's the whole point of it.
I'm crazy for David Pumpkins.
I think people liked it so much because it was the last show before Trump got elected, and the cold open was pretty dark. And then right after the monologue, there was a pre-tape. I think it was called like The Dome or something like that. And it was all about everyone moving underneath a dome because like the world was ending and it was terrifying time. And then all of a sudden it was just fucking weirdo David Pumpkins out of nowhere. And I think it was the last time people went like, oh, that was funny. And then all hell broke loose.
Right. For the next 4 years. Was it apparent that something very alchemistically magnetic had happened, or more of a slow burn?
Yeah. Tom Hanks was hosting for a movie. It might have been like Angels and Demons or one of those like Da Vinci Code movies or something. I don't even remember what it was for. And the premiere for it was the Sunday after. So he had done like David Pumpkins and then went to bed, woke up and went to a premiere. And every single person was calling him David Pumpkins. And it was crazy. And then he sent us a text saying like, I'm just getting called David Pumpkins. And then sent us a text where he took a BuzzFeed quiz about which Tom Hanks character was he, and he got David Pumpkins. And it had happened like 36 hours before. Yeah, still don't get it.
Didn't he question the entire concept and was wondering, what the hell are we?
He still does. I think he still does. Yeah, he didn't like it. Yeah, he just was like, what the fuck is this? And we were like, we don't know either, but it's fun, right? And then once he stopped caring and just went nuts and had fun, I think that's what made it work.
Right.
Got it.
So we almost forgot the most important question of all, which we ask all of our guests. What is your favorite scene in This Is Spinal Tap?
Wow. I mean, that's impossible.
What comes into your mind first?
Like everything, like Fran Drescher and just everyone who's in it. They don't make movies like that anymore. I wish they would do more movies like Spinal Tap now, is what I'm saying.
Well, they are. They're doing a sequel. You know that?
Oh, I did hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, they filmed it. They're back already and they're finishing it up. They're in post, I think. But yeah, but you know, it's funny. When I came to LA, one of the first people that I recognized was Julie Payne. And she was at my Pete's Coffee. And Julie was Buffy in WKRP in Cincinnati, Howard Hesseman's hippie girlfriend. But she's also one of the mime caterers.
Amazing.
Yes. And so I was like, oh my God, you're
Billy Crystal too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Billy Crystal and Dana Carvey.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
A lot of good people in that small bit.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You know, I don't think we ever mentioned this, but the Spinal Tap team did another mockumentary a few years after Spinal Tap called Don't Get Me Started. And it's a behind the scenes mock about the making of a Billy Crystal comedy special. And like Spinal Tap, it's directed by Marty DeBurgi, Rob Reiner's character from the movie. And Billy Crystal plays all his famous characters like Sammy Davis Jr., Buddy Young Jr., Fernando Lamas, and Christopher Guest plays choreographer Chip DiMentabella, and Eugene Levy from Schitt's Creek's on there, and a lot of SCTV people. Anyways, it's as good as Spinal Tap. And until it made its way to YouTube, it was sitting on a 40-year-old VHS with the Martin Short Cinemax specials from the 80s in my library.
So, Bobby, do you remember when you first saw the film? Where and what was the setting?
I think I saw it as a kid and didn't really understand it, and then saw it again in college and went like, oh. I think like I almost thought it was real when I was young and didn't really understand what I was seeing. And then once I found comedy and all that stuff started coming into my life, like Mr. Show and all that stuff, I think that's when I revisited it and went, oh, this is genius.
You were on Conan O'Brien prior to SNL. And as tour manager for Radiohead, I was on set Conan's second night on the air because Radiohead was the very first musical guest on his show.
Wow.
Is there a story you can tell us from Conan as we wrap up?
Yes, definitely. My most memorable one was do you remember that thing where he would just flip through the different channels? He had a TV from the future and he would just flip through different fake channels. He did it a bunch. And the joke was literally the Blueberry Screams channel. And they were like, we're just going to shoot you for 5 seconds. You're going to stand in this kiddie pool and we're going to put blueberry jelly in your mouth and you're just going to scream. And it was just a shot of my face. And I just stood there for a second and then I screamed and blueberry jelly fell out of my mouth. It was not funny. It was weird, whatever. I got paid. At the time, I was extremely happy. But we were shooting it in the elevator banks. And the second I screamed and opened my mouth and jelly came out of my mouth and the elevator doors opened and Bruce Springsteen walks out. And he looks at me and he goes, hey, you got a little something on your shirt. And he keeps walking. Hundreds of those moments in that building where you're just like some insanely famous person walks by where you're doing something stupid.
That's so fun.
Yeah, the best.
For our listeners, where can they keep up on what you're doing?
I have a podcast called Who Me with the Batman on cbbworld.com under CBB Presents. You can check that out. I'm on all the social media stuff, but I never do anything with it. You can check out the movie If or the movie Inside Out 2.
And you just did Unfrosted, right? You were Chef Boyardee.
Oh, yeah. Jerry Seinfeld's Unfrosted on Netflix.
Fantastic. It was really a pleasure. Thanks for coming on the show.
Twice.
Thanks so much. Good to talk to you guys.
Listeners, isn't that just how life goes? Some insanely famous person walks by when you're doing something stupid? That one hits a little too close to home. Thanks to Bobby for swapping stories with us, and special thanks to Hannah Berkowitz at Odenkirk Provisero for all the help connecting with Bobby twice. Too Much Effing Perspective is a Milwaukee Talkies original. Our editor is Gretchen Kilby. Our music composer is J.K. Harrison. Please follow us on Instagram at TMEP Show. Visit our website at tmepshow.com to sign up for our email list and find our other episodes featuring rock stars, comedians, and entertainment luminaries whose bizarro stories we enjoy and we think you will too on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
Although it would be as great as having armadillos in our trousers, this podcast is not affiliated with This Is Spinal Tap, and no person or entity connected with the film has sponsored or endorsed its content. The podcast is not affiliated, sponsored, or licensed by Authorized Spinal Tap LLC or Century of Progress Productions.
Evergreen Podcast Network.